Hi, y'all. My name is Kerwin Ray, and you are listening to Unstoppable with me, your host, Kerwin Ray, the man who talks at a mile a minute. But in this episode, I sit back and I ask some incredible questions as I interview John Fitzgerald. Let me tell you something. This man has been in the game of property for longer than almost anyone that I've ever met. And most importantly, he's going to give you the insights and you the know-how, not just on property, but how he built an incredibly successful business off the back of it. This one's going to blow your freaking mind. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to Unstoppable a man who I first heard about I think it was about 20 years ago. He wrote a book called The 7 Steps to Wealth. And you were also a big on the infomercials at the time.
I was.
Yeah, really big at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, John Fitzgerald. Mate, it's great to have you here.
Fantastic to be here, Kerwin.
Mate,
really
I've followed your story for a whole range of reasons because I remember I was in a job. I was working for Franklin Covey at the time, and I got turned on to property investment, and I started reading, all these property investment books, and yours was one of the first that I started to read. I remember it had a profound. What I really loved about it, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, it was actually the simplicity of it.
Yeah.
Like it was a really simple, step-by-step, follow the bouncing ball user's guide to how to invest in property.
I actually just dictated it in 3 hours.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I'm not an academic in any way whatsoever, and I wanted to write almost real estate for dummies, and also something that anyone could use as a tool for motivation as well.
Yeah,
so
right.
Step one, for example, is growth. Yep. And step one in anything you do is, hey, today I'm going to grow, a fraction. Yep. So step one, growth. How do you grow in real estate? Land content. So my concept was to explain it simply, so I dictated it in 3 hours. Wow. And then it took my editor 3 months to unravel it and unjumble it.
And I know that book's been revised, I think, about 7 or 8 times now. How many copies has that actually sold?
Over 250,000 copies now.
Wow, well done, mate.
Yeah.
And then I remember seeing you, and this is where I really started to pay attention, because I've always been a bit of a marketer, a direct response. And then I was always interested in the infomercial game. And then I think it was because you were doing the after hours infomercials, weren't you?
Yeah.
Late night television, coming home, pie in one hand, hot dog in the other, after a big night on the Terps, turning the TV on. I was like, fuck, he's on TV as well.
It was a crazy time because the guys from Danos got a hold of me and said, John, we love what you do. Why don't you do a pack and we'll team with Danos? And for like a short time, I teamed with Danos and realised that it was just a different direction we were going in. So I decided, look, I'll carve my own out and do property and motivation, as well as take people along for the journey, so to speak, because I really wanted to engage, and that was fantastic for us. We'd get a half hour. Yeah. This is back in the day. Half hour on Channel 10 or Channel 7 for like $2,500 or $3,000. And then you'd be on, or after the hour of power, or Anthony Robbins or
Tony Robbins,
like that. All that sort of stuff.
Yeah, mate, that's golden. And so I think what's interesting about your story, like you started with nothing, but you ended up building $100 million empire. And, the thing that I find fascinating, remembering your book and, following you as I have for the last 20 years, it wasn't until I started to do my research for this interview that I started to go, shit, you've actually got quite a story. And look, maybe some of it's in the book and I've forgotten it, but where did it all begin? Because you're now you're now probably one of the most successful property investors we've got in our country. You've not just been a successful property investor, you've also been a very successful business owner. And those two don't often go necessarily hand in hand. So you've actually really commercialized it. But where did it all begin? How did you get involved in the game?
Do you know what? I brought up in Melbourne. Dad died in a car accident when I was 8 years old. At age 10, I was sent to boarding school. Aged 15, I was kicked out of school. And age 16, I hitchhiked from Melbourne to Queensland. And that was sort of starting a new part of my life. And I was starting...
16's quite young.
16 was young,
Why bailing so early?
Mum and 5 kids. There was just nothing for me. I think I'd have to say, there are 2 types of people in this world. There's heart people and the head people. I'm very much a heart person, and I just didn't feel that there was something for me in Melbourne.
Yeah, right.
I didn't know where I was going to go, because by that stage, by the way, I'd never been outside of Victoria. We weren't wealthy, but I'd never been outside of Victoria. But I heard, hey, there's girls walking down the main street of Surfers Paradise in bikinis.
That's enough for any 16-year-old boy, isn't it, really?
16, I'm going. Because I went to boarding school in Ballarat.
Yeah,
and
right.
The opposite of that would be Surfers Paradise.
Yeah, right.
So I hitchhiked. In fact, 4 of us were going to hitchhike. The 3 pulled out, and I said, no, I'm going. I went to the Gold Coast, and I just felt the the buzz and felt it was going through a property boom. And I thought, you know what, for someone who not an academic and doesn't want to go to university, how can I make real money? That was the question.
Yeah, right.
And there was only two things.
So you were tuned on pretty early, the whole concept of making money.
Well, it was survival more than anything, because
Yeah,
I had
right.
$200.
Yep.
And I didn't want to go and work for, $10 an hour or something. I didn't want to be that person. I wanted to be the person that worked harder than anybody else and worked smarter than anybody else.
Right. So at age 17, 16, 17, was it about building wealth, or was it about survival at this point? Or did you have this void, because I know for myself, I grew up, single mum on a pension, and so I had this void of money. And so from as long as I can remember, I was like, fuck, I want to make money. I want to make a lot of money, because I never had it. Was that how it kind of ran for you, or was it literally just, I just need to be able to put food in mouth?
No, not for me. It's never been a survival. For me, it's how can I be the best I can be?
Yeah, right.
Every day I ask myself, and I always have, how can I reach my full potential? Have I reached my full potential? How can I go 1 inch closer? And I felt that reaching my full potential as a 16 or 17-year-old, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 25. That's what I want to do.
So you set that intention.
That was my intention.
Yeah, right.
And then, okay, how do I do that? Well, first of all, I've got to find out who millionaires are. Well, the millionaires on the Gold Coast were property people.
Yeah.
So, and my first mentors were Jewish property moguls who, they taught me just fantastic habits.
Frugality.
Well, no, mostly actually success is just repetition.
Right.
Do 2 things every day you don't like doing. There's only truth in numbers. And they just drilled it into me. There's only truth in numbers. Success is repetition. And most importantly, do 2 things every day you don't like doing. Learn to like your dislikes.
Yeah, right.
And, as a 17-year-old, what I didn't like getting up early, and I didn't like knocking on doors. So, my mentor, okay, get up every morning at 6 a.m. and go and knock on doors. And I thought, shit, no, that's to have a 17-year-old. That's the worst thing in the world. And it was only when I learnt to like my dislikes. And this is an interesting concept from a brain perspective, because we have our left brain and our right brain. Your left brain will fight every tooth and nail. We'll say, this guy's using you. This is the wrong thing. This doesn't work. You're just a patsy. All that. That's your left brain. Your right brain is your creative mind. And it wasn't until it took me 3 months for my left brain, where I literally gave up, and then my right brain kicked in and said, you know what, you could actually learn to like your dislikes. You could learn to like knocking on doors. How? By making their day. So I got really good at knocking on doors. And to be honest, I'm still knocking on doors now, but they're in China or Singapore or all over the world, right. Capital markets and things like that.
So age 17, you're knocking on doors, and I'm going to assume the Jewish friends, mentors that you had acquired, they were developers.
Yep.
And you were knocking on doors looking for
sites.
There we go.
Yeah, I was the king of land, and from surface to Burleigh, I was just digging up sites, and it paid really well. But I realised that I wanted to be that developer as well. So I wanted to play the markets, so get active in relation to real estate as well as passive.
Yeah, right. So I'm curious, like the thing that's popping in my head right now, age 17, you've gone to the Gold Coast on your own. I'm curious, as a young bloke, your father passing at age 8, that must have been quite an impact at that early age, or were you not too close with him?
Oh, no, Dad. I love Dad. Well, there was 5 kids. Irish Catholic family,
yeah.
And Dad died in a car accident, and it was obviously very, very sudden. And then Mum was a 41-year-old single mother, and Dad had a couple of menswear stores. She had to take over the stores, but couldn't look after the 3 older boys, so sent us to boarding school. Right. And I'd honestly say that the first time I ever remember deep anxiety where, inside your stomach,
yeah.
was when I was 9 years old, and 2 teachers came to the house to tell me that, John, you have to go to boarding school now, and you have to skip grade 6 and go into grade 7 at boarding school at St. Pat's in Ballarat. And that was the most daunting time, because as an 8-year-old,
almost even a little bit traumatic. You just lost your dad, and then you've been sent away from your family. That must have been tough.
Look, it was tough, but I'm a person that looks forward all the time.
Yeah.
I don't look back. I don't understand trauma. I don't understand adversity. That might have happened in the past, but it didn't affect my future. It just just gave me some anxiety that I thought, okay, I've got to make something of things myself.
Yeah, right.
I can't really be reliant on the rest of the world falling into place for me. So going through boarding school then, it was fairly clear that I wasn't going to follow the path of a lot of the other kids who are going to work for the government or go to university. No, I'll cut my own path. I'll try and cut my own path and find my own way.
And so when you hooked up with this developer, it sounds like he was a mentor. Was there almost like a bit of a father figure relationship?
Yeah, father-son relationship. Yeah, absolutely. You know, they were fantastic. They were, you know, when I was 21, 22 and, you know, wanted to break out on my own, they loaned me $3 million at 20% interest.
Shit.
Oh, yeah.
Is this what are we talking here? Late 80s?
No, this is
early 90s?
1985, 86.
Okay, yeah, right.
So they loaned me $3 million, 20% interest, but I was the gun. I had to prove myself.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll take the 3 any day. I'll take the 3. I'll give you 20% on it and 50% of the profit. At the end of the year, and this was the most amazing thing, at the end of the year, I gave them their $3 million back plus 20%, plus we'd made another $2.2 million by buying and selling a property. And I said to them, okay, let's divvy it up. Give me my check for $1 million. And they said, that's not how it works. I said, what do you mean? And I said, we've done a deal. I'll take my mill and I'm off. I'll do my own thing. I said, no, you're on us now. You know, if we've had success together, we work together. So go and make some more money. And I said, yeah, but what about my $1 million? What do you need that for? I said, you know, well, I want to buy a house. They said, how much is a house? And I said, I want $400,000. I want $400,000 to buy a waterfront house. So they got a checkbook and wrote me a check for $400,000 and said, here, go and take your $400,000 and go off and let's make some real money now. And that was that was the not only the double down, but it was necessary for me because I think you do need mentors. I think you need mentors, older people that you can go to just for that. You know, keeping you in line, asking you questions, pointing you in right directions, all of that. Now, they've all died now. They've, died in the last 8 or 10 years. And my mentor, my latest mentor is Dr. Ron Farmer, who's 80 this year. And my other mentor is George Margolis, 91. So mentors have been a big part of me getting ahead because they did discover me at age 16, 17, 18. Yes, I was a person who had a lot of discipline and had a lot of energy, but not a lot of knowledge. But I think they liked that. I think that I was like that blank tape that they could program.
So 23, like you were like 19 when you met these guys, 18, 19 when you met your first mentors. You mentioned discipline there. Did you already have a bit of a discipline wiring from the boarding school?
Yeah, I was very disciplined. Very, very disciplined, and also willing to take advice and take advice. Based on what they told me. Yeah. Some people say, if a coach tells you to do it, will you actually do it? Yeah. If a coach tells me to do it, I'll actually do it. Yeah. I won't muck around. If I respect them, if they've been there, done that, then I will practice that.
Now, I find with most people, discipline typically comes as a habit that is repeated in some kind of routine with frequency and consistency over time. I see it in our most talented members in our organisation. Typically, people have been, either professional or highly competitive in a specific discipline. Where did you learn discipline, or was this something that you were brought up with in the household?
Do you know? I think success comes from something inside your heart, not your head. So inside my heart, I felt there was something bigger for me. Now, that's really where the discipline started, because the only way I need to achieve anything was through discipline on the sports field or study or anything like that involved repetition. Yeah, right. And in that regard, if I have a heart for it, then I'll be unstoppable in that regard. If it's just in my head, it's just not going to happen. So where it came from my heart wasn't the need for money or the desperation for money or anything like that. Just this feeling that, you know what, I've got something special, and I want to have a real crack.
But were you like a competitor? Like at school, were you competitive in sports? Were you
highly competitive?
What was your discipline? Like what was it?
I played a lot of footy and did a lot of running, gymnastics, and still today, I still Still get on my watt bike and punch out, 250 to 300 watts. I still run 5Ks under 20 minutes. I still sort of push myself as much as I possibly can, and played A-grade polo for, over 20 years.
And that in itself speaks volumes. And I guess one of the things I'm curious to know, because you obviously, as an educator, you're not just an investor, you're not just a developer, you're also an educator. What is one of the things that you see as missing from people? Because you can give the same piece of information to two people will buy your book, read your book. One person will go and make tens of millions of dollars over the next 10 years. One person will be fucking just as broke as what they were. What do you think is the key distinction between the two?
You've got to think, feel, say, and do one thing. Most people, they think one thing, feel something separate to that, say something different, and do something even different to that. So they're going in four directions. They're going north, west, east, and south. And they don't even know where they're going. My view is whatever you do it 150%. But make sure your heart and mind and every part of you is fully engaged. We call it the ABC, awareness, awareness of those four things. Belief, I believe in it, but conviction is where you're really living it. It becomes your religion, so to speak. And that's where I see most people is a difference. And they get caught up in their head. They read this, they read that. You go from here to there, and they just not committed as individuals.
So they read about property investing, and then all of a sudden they learn to read about flipping properties. The next thing they're reading about property options, and they become scattered. So 23, 24, you've done your first deal. You take your 400 grand out to buy your waterfront property. What comes next?
Oh, look, I did a series. I did, thousands of transactions after that. And probably, I've done much more than 10,000 transactions.
Wow.
But mostly development subdivisions,
Yep.
Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, all over the place. And I was sort of going to box myself in to be the property developer.
Yeah.
And I suppose the big change was then my mentor, and this is a great thing about mentors. When I got, because I made money very quickly and good at it. When I was 25 or 26 years old, my mentor knocked on, my door and said, "Hey, John, you're a bit out of control because I've got the waterfront house, so I reached my goal."
Yeah.
And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Mate, you're just a bit out of control. You're becoming a dickhead." I said, "Oh, really?"
So it started going to the head, did it?
Yeah. And he said, "You need to learn to practice humility." And I thought, what does that mean? What is humility? What is practicing humility? What's the difference between learning humility and practicing humility? And he said, "You need to find that out." And he said, "I want you to put in a large chunk of your income every year. This will put you on the treadmill into working with charity. Pick a charity. Pick something that you've got passion for." So I did. Because I was the youth at risk, the single mum, dad died, all that sort of thing. I thought I'll work with youth at risk, and I put in 2/3 of my income at the time, about $200,000 a year. I was earning about 300 grand a year. It's a lot of money back then. It's like earning $1 million a year now. And I put 2/3 of my income into. First of all, we started a house in Sydney. I was living in Queensland. I started a house in Sydney. Reverend Bill Carew, the older one, gave us a great house. And we ran that for a few years, then moved the house to Queensland, and then started schooling and education because we realised that was the missing link. And I think, when someone says to me, the definition of humility, it really is when I spend time at the school, and I go there every couple of days a week.
This is the Toogoolawah Children's Home now?
Yeah, Toogoolawah School. It's a school, we've got 100 kids. They've all been kicked out of mainstream schools.
Right.
And so some of them haven't been to school for a couple of years. And they've all got a degree of trauma in their past. Some of them are with DOCS, Department of Child Services, foster parents, or alternatively, a single parent or some with their grandparents. I've even had kids living in cars with their mum, and it's just a very sad situation. But we get them to our school. We teach them meditation. We teach them to live in their heart. Toogoolawah means a place in the heart. Aboriginal word which means a place in the heart. And I started this because my mentor literally knocked on my head and said, "Hey, you need to learn and practice humility." And that's been probably the greatest thing I've ever done, and taken my eye off the the hammering of I need to be a billionaire, I need to be this, I need to be that, I need to be that. I don't need to do anything. I just say, you know what, I've got one school, I'd like to do another school and another school, and that's where I see myself actually making a contribution.
Your legacy.
I don't see the property side. Yes, I've written a book and I'm coaching thousands of people in property, but I see the real contribution in the youth at risk.
So is it almost like now you're more driven by the legacy of the school than you are of the legacy of having $1 billion portfolio?
The $1 billion portfolio to me is no great interest, to be honest. I do want to encourage Australians, because I see Australians retiring with nothing. 6 out of 7 of them every week, 600 out of 700 retiring with nothing or next to nothing. And I see it's crazy because we've got the largest population growth we've ever seen in Australian history. And on top of that, we've got our best performing asset in Australia, which is our land. Not property, land. And the difference between real estate and property is that real estate's the land. That's what appreciates. The property that sits on top of it depreciates. But a lot of people don't know it or fully understand it. So I am driven by educating that group. And I have a great group of clients, CEOs of banks, heads of companies, but also, plumbers, every Australian you can imagine who's building a portfolio, 2, 3, 4, some of them with 19, 20 properties. On the other side of it, in my school, the real thing that I really work hard at is trying to stamp violence and bullying out of our school.
Yeah, nice.
And that's one that in the back of my mind, if you ask me, Kerwin, what has been the driver, but also been your driver is also sometimes your downfall as well. The driver has been that competitiveness, but the competitiveness can become violent, because we become aggressive towards people, or we get angry within ourselves, and that's a form of violence. So I just think, how can we, and part of our ritual at the school is to practice what we call non-violence. What is non-violence? It's not even the thought of any competition or me thinking above or below you in any way whatsoever. That's an experiment we're still doing in the school. We count the days without violence now at the school. Right. And remember, all these kids, we call them mad, bad, or sad. They've all come from a broken background.
Dysfunctional background.
A broken background. And that may be a school situation. They may have, been violated. They may have had a lot of things happen. But what we find is that they come along and we teach them meditation. We teach them the place in the heart. And inch by inch, I see we're getting to a stage where we'll have a full term of no violence, and then a full year without violence. And 100 kids, that's going to be an amazing celebration.
What's the demographic, the age bracket?
They're 8 years old to 15.
Yeah, right. And you're teaching them meditation
every day.
What type of what style of meditation? Is it just mindfulness? Or?
Yeah, it's just really mindfulness. But our headmaster, he's a lay Benedictine monk, and he and I often go to India. And I practice, and Ron and Sue Farmer practice Kriya Yoga, which is a meditation in itself.
Yep.
So we use different techniques,
yep.
But essentially we get them to slow their breath down, and then to slow their brain waves down. And if we can slow their breath down, because most take between 20 and 26 breaths a minute. So if we get their breath down to say 8 to 12 beats a minute, it'll slow their brain down. And if we can get them to see the cracks between the thoughts, that's where they'll get the true connectedness, the true feeling, of spirituality.
So meditation, mindfulness, spirituality, that sounds like it's quite a big part of your life now.
Oh, it always has been.
So when did it enter? Was it something that's always been there because you grew up in a Irish Catholic church? It was a religion at first, but then turned spiritual in nature, or?
No, I and this is a bizarre thing, and I don't talk about it much, but the day my dad died, I told him that I wasn't going to see him again. And it was a bizarre thing. I went up to him, and it was at the garage, and I remember saying goodbye, and he had to go overnight to Shepparton to see my brother, who was in hospital. He'd burned his leg. And I went and gave Dad a hug and a kiss and said, Dad, goodbye, I'm not seeing you again. No, I'll be back tomorrow. And I went to Mum and said, Dad's not coming back. So somehow I knew that there was something else there. something else there.
Yeah, right.
And then, ironically, when I went to boarding school and around about age 11, 12, 13, I just felt this intuition. And, you know, we all have this intuition or deja vu. We just felt this intuition that, you know what, there's somewhere I need to be and not be, and I'll follow my heart or my intuition in that regard. And that led me then to investigating different spirituality. And back when I was 15, transcendental meditation was doing the rounds, massive.
Yep.
You know, and the Beatles and people after that made it very famous. So I studied transcendental meditation, then various silver mind dynamics and various things like that, and found a real peace and contentment. And where it led me to Kriya Yoga, which was it's a very famous book called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahamsa.
One of my favourite books.
Yeah, Yogananda. And Yogananda talks about Kriya Yoga, and it's the only yoga that that they spoke about in the Yoga Sutras. That Kriya Yoga was the first yoga, and it led me to Kriya Yoga and led me to a fantastic teacher or guru in India. And he and I spent a lot of time together, and I go to India every year, and I've been up into the Himalayan mountains and had some just crazy experiences. I mean, crazy experiences that, you know, of this feeling and of connectedness that I believe goes to the root of our spirituality, that we're all just connected, you know, and if you find that stillness in your mind, it's stilling your thoughts, and then you'll feel the connection with everything and everyone. And that's what meditation is to me, and why it's so important and so special to me.
And have you've linked them together, but I'll ask because it sounds like it is quite a conscious connection. Have you identified a very conscious link between meditation and intuition?
Oh, I'm sure. Yes. Yeah. I think so. Meditation is a state of no thoughts, no mind, and where you're connected to everything and everyone, and therefore you know you don't have this feeling of time, present, past, future, or anything like that. And once you feel that, you know, it's like feeling that abundance.
It's blissful.
You know, that's really blissful. And I go up into the Himalayan mountains, and I do that because it's hypoxic. So, you know, your breath has to be shortened at 4,000 meters.
Yeah,
right. And it's just an amazing experience.
Wow, I've never actually heard that before. Doing meditation at altitude, hypoxic, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So you actually find it's a different experience at altitude.
Oh, massive. Yeah. You
Wow.
In fact, when we're walking up the mountain, when we're climbing the mountain, your heart rate's going through the roof because you're thinking, geez, you know, I can't move, can't walk. Particularly you get above 3,000, sometimes you get the headaches and all that sort of thing. And when you get to 4,000, everything slows down. Everything absolutely slows down. And, you know, after I had an experience in a cave right at the top of the mountain once, of all things, where I just, you know, had this out-of-body experience, you know, amazing things happening. And I was crying like a baby for 4 days.
Wow.
I came down the mountain. I was just crying like a baby for 4 days.
So just a massive spiritual
just
release.
Something that I felt, you know. And we go back to the interesting part about the Western philosophy. You know, Western philosophy was probably predicated on the I think, therefore I am. You know, I think, therefore I am. And a lot of the schools, I think, therefore I am. I would say our philosophy should be I feel, therefore I am. Because unless you actually feel it, unless you feel everything, you're somewhat, you're just not participating. You're not a part of it all. And I know some very wealthy guys, you know, billionaires, who have lost their sense of feeling. You know, it's all just the adrenaline of the rush of making money, and they love making money, and that's what gives them the rush. But they seem to have lost that sense of actual feeling, you know, feeling around them.
Wow. Okay, so you're 24, 25, you've turned over a few deals now. At what point did you make the move, and you've opened the school, you're working with youth at risk. At what point did you go, you know what, I see a greater opportunity here to start educating people at large?
Well, it was 7 years after I started the charity, the school.
Okay.
And I realised
So you're in your early 30s at this point?
Yeah, I was 35.
Okay.
And I realised that, you know what, for me to create something where the school will go on beyond me, I need to create people who can help fund the school, beneficiaries. So the best thing I can do is teach people how to be a millionaire, a multi-millionaire. And by the way, a percentage of them will then, you know, maybe get involved with the school. So I decided to, I looked at all the books on real estate, and it just amazed me how no one ever spoke about, land, compound growth, truths that I knew that just took for granted, from my Jewish mentors. Buy property, never sell. When it grows, buy another one. You'll get compound growth. And when I spoke to people, what's compound growth? I don't know. And I thought, that's just amazing. It's repetition, but it's the benefit of continued repetition. Most people give up 90% before they click over their goal. And I thought, that's amazing. So I wrote a very simple book, or I should say I dictated a very simple book, got it cleaned up, made sure it was in simple terms that anyone could read, a 14-year-old could read, 7 Steps to Wealth. And then that launched me talking about property. But I realised that the missing link was actually the motivation. And when I say the motivation, people had it in their heads, but they didn't have it in their hearts.
The why.
Yeah, the why.
Yeah.
And that's what motivation is. It's the why you're going to do it. Why are you going to do it when it gets out and rain? Why are you going to run that 5Ks when it's raining, when it's pouring down with rain? Why are you going to do it then? It's easy to do it when it's pleasant, but why are you going to do it when it's not? That was what was missing. So I had to dig into that, and I looked into my yoga and my spirituality to find that sense of connectedness.
Yeah, right. And so it was a very conscious decision. You've launched the book. Did you launch the book with the idea of launching an education company at the same time?
Never.
It was just the book started doing really well?
Yep. The book started doing really well, and I just thought, look, if people come and take a step towards me, they do. If they don't, they don't. But then there was just so many people taking steps towards me. The radio was going nuts. This was the boom of 1998, 99, 2000. Yeah, and that was probably one of their biggest cycle markets. So, I was on radio, on TV, on this and that. And then it was really the guys from Danos who said, listen, we've got half-hour spots that we can get you if you've got a pack because. And I thought, what, it feels right. It feels the right direction to go in. And that really then launched me investigating, how do I get somebody who hasn't connected the dots on head and heart? How do I connect the dots on that? And literally a lot of what we were doing was stuff that Dr. Ron Farmer was teaching at our school. Was connecting those two dots, thinking, right. Think, say, feel, do one thing.
Yeah, right. And so, by sounds of it, it took off a lot more. Did it take off when it took off? Because obviously you built that to 100 million at one point. That business is still going strong today.
Yeah, it's still going very, very strong. But I have my own business, and then I have a coaching business. The coaching business,
right?
We have thousands and thousands of clients all over Australia, and in a lot of times we have to shut the doors and say, listen, we can't take new business.
Yep.
So we go through stages of not being able to take new business because we've got a commitment. If someone comes and buys, gets a property off us in one state, as it grows, we duplicate to the next. So we can shut the doors on new clients and open them. We just have to do it from time to time.
It creates a natural demand.
Yeah, but then I have my own portfolio of commercial and residential and rural property that is built up over the years. Because I'm doing what I'm telling people to do as well.
Yep, because you're doing property as a business, but then all of a sudden you become the educator and the coach. And like building $1 million business and again, the statistics, I'm sure you're probably aware, it takes on average in this country over 7 to 10 years to build $1 million business. But most businesses, about 4.6% of businesses actually survive in the first 5 years, and there's less than 1.8% that survive by year 10. You didn't build $1 million business, you built a $100 million business, which is quite substantial. I'm curious to know perhaps some of the psychology and maybe also explore some of the mechanics of how you actually did that, because that's no small feat. That puts you in the top, 0.0001% of entrepreneurs when it comes to building a business.
I think, the key is going to be your relationships and your collaboration.
Yep.
And there was a great study by Harvard, and I would say, because I've been doing this for 35 years, so it didn't happen overnight, by the way. I'm 55 now, and I started when I was, in fact, 17, 18.
But do you mind if I could just stop quickly and say, from when you launched the book and became an educator, how long did it take to build the 100 million?
Probably 10 years. It probably was 10 years.
Yep.
And I think the reason I was able to do it is because I had a great network within real estate. Because I'd done so many thousands of transactions, I just knew everybody in real estate, everybody in finance, everyone in valuations, and I was able to pull that network together as a collaboration. And, I've got to say I've got great people over the years. You know, my financial controller's been with me for 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That speaks volumes.
And, you know, I've got people in my office who have been with me for 10, 15, 20 years. And we've got a great bunch of people and a great network outside of our group as well, where we just work with people as much as we possibly can. And it connects us in every state. So if we want to know something about property or about somebody, it's just one phone call away for us. Right. And you know, I think that's a key, because you've got to have that accountability. You've got to have the collaboration, and most importantly, you've got to have initiative. You've got to be able to knock on doors. You know, they're the three things. And accountability means you've got to deliver. You know, I've been successful because my clients have made, you know, over $1 billion, $1.5 billion out of their property. Because of our collaboration, we work with all the major property developers, all the major financiers, all the major banks. We just work with them all. And then having the initiative to go and actually get out, knock on doors, do deals, that's a cultural thing. And I find, you know, quite interesting, most Australians, interestingly, are reactive. We're very proactive. We see something, we go and have a shot. We go and investigate it. If it fails, it fails. And we fail a lot, but we fail very quickly. And then we move on. You know, but then when we get the formula right, we really go to town on that. So that's having that initiative to continually push those boundaries, continually push through. And all businesses need to do it. You know, similarly, all teams. You know, like a football team. You can't be playing the way you did 2 years ago or 3 years ago, because the game has gone beyond you. You know, you've got to be ahead of it. So you must be running. You must be running, you know, have that initiative to move faster. And you need to be collaborating with the people who are moving and shaking, you know, at that pace as well.
Yeah, right. So when you went from the transition from property business to education business, was there any moments of, holy shit, this is a different animal? You know, property is, you know, it's very solid, it's very reliable, it just sits there, it doesn't talk back to me. You know, now I'm dealing with a lot more in the form of moving parts. Were there any major kind of hiccups in the early stages as you were building the education side of the business?
I think the lucky thing is I actually like and care about people, and I like speaking in public as well, and I'm very much a warts and all. Property's not going to go up every year. You know, you've seen the Sydney cycle go up and then it'll flatline and then go up again. So I pretty much tell people to play the long game. And most of the people who, you know, from an education perspective would get angry or, you know, come back and say that doesn't work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's because they took the short game. You know, they expected to buy something and sell it in a year. I've never said that. I've never said it. You should do it. In fact, I said in the book 7 Steps, if you buy and sell in a year and you think it's a business, then you're pretty much a fool, because your in and out costs are maybe 15%. So, you know, if you buy it for 500,000 and sell it for, you know, 600,000, you barely make any money out of it anyway, and you might as well use it for compound growth. So I think I've tried to differentiate myself, and probably not as well at the start, that we're playing a long game. Even though I said it in the first edition of 7 Steps, you've got to play that long game. But a lot of people say, yes, I'm going to play the long game, but then they get frustrated after 6 months, a year, or 18 months. You know, it's not working. The education you're giving is not working. Wait on, you're not actually playing.
You're 18
long
months into a 50-year game.
That's right.
You don't you don't measure the success of a game at quarter time. You know, there's still a few quarters to play. I'm more interested in the business side though. Like, you know, the property side is one thing, but what were some of the major hiccups that you had to overcome, or major adversity that you had to overcome as a entrepreneur? You know, in business, property was the business, that was the vehicle. But I'm curious, as you were growing your business, like, what were some of the bigger hiccups that you had to overcome that taught you some really valuable lessons that you think are quite practical that stay with you today?
You know, I think the most important thing is you're going to have those bad days, obviously.
Yep.
And you're going to have the days where it feels like, you know, you're under attack and that everything's going wrong and all that sort of thing. Just push through it. Because those people who play the short game, they will have a crack at you, but they'll only have a crack for a short period of time. You know, they won't play the long game. You know, and you see people who have been really successful over the years, they've played the long game, and they've always struggled in the short game. You know, and the best property story in Australia is probably Frank Lowy. Started Westfield in 1960.
Yep. Came out as a cab driver.
Well, came out and was working in Parramatta selling sausages.
Yeah, right.
And I'm proud to say I've met Frank a couple of times through my connections. Just a beautiful human being, but determined, really determined. And when they set up Westfield, they couldn't. The stockbroker couldn't raise the money, but the stockbroker underwrote it. So he put in the $150,000 to get them up and running to do their first Westfield. Now, if you had have invested in Westfield, and they couldn't get finance from banks because they were building shop. They were really forming and shaping a vision of the future, and no one was on board. In fact, it took a long time for them to come on board. But Frank really did stick to his guns on it. And when people actually came on board, then it went from powerhouse to powerhouse. If you had have invested $1,000 in Westfield in 1960 and sold out when he sold out last year, you would have got a check for $450 million. Now, there's nothing actually you can show me. That's not a story about the stock market. It's actually a story about two things: building a great business, but a land-based business, and how in the first 5 to 10 years you are going to be challenged, but it should be just water off a duck's back. Remember, you're playing the long game. Same as if we're playing sport, competitive sport, you're going to get niggled and hassled and all that sort of thing. But after the first quarter, it gets less and less and less. And by the last quarter, they're just holding on. They're just struggling. That's the game. That's the game that I think we all should be playing.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've made as an entrepreneur?
I've backed myself and where I shouldn't have. And I suppose the biggest mistake I ever made, I lost $1 million I was buying a subdivision. I always buy property subject to approval. And I thought I was going to get approval, and I was 2 months away from approval, and then my contract was up. So I went unconditional, and I didn't get approval. And because I didn't get approval, the bank wouldn't finance it, so I lapsed on my contract. Ooh. And I managed to get finance afterwards. This is when I was in my early 30s. I managed to get finance afterwards, but the vendor had sold it to their next door neighbour who was involved with the council that actually caused me to not get my approval. Oh, so I just realised, you know what, the world's not necessarily a perfect place for me. It is a perfect place for me, but you've got to be 360-degree wary. And you've got to realise that there could be people working against you, in whatever business. So stack the cards. And the mistake I made was going unconditional on a property that I didn't have approval, that I should have gotten approval and would have, and all that sort of thing, but I didn't. And they're sort of the little things that you learn from. That I should be disciplined enough to know not to make that error. I should have been disciplined enough to know not to make that error, because it's not so much it's a rookie error, but that was greedy.
Yeah, right. So look, I'm curious to know. I think a lot of people who've studied wealth for long enough realize that the majority of the wealth that is made in a downturn. I'm curious to know if you subscribe to that theory.
Well, if you understand our markets, particularly residential, you'd see that when Sydney declines, Southeast Queensland goes up. And in fact, the Gold Coast where I live is a good example. 3 times over the last 30 years, the Gold Coast median house prices eclipsed Sydney, but always within 2 or 3 years of Sydney's decline. And what you see in Australia, interestingly, is that we have different markets. We have Melbourne and Sydney running on a different time cycle, and then the rest of Australia running separately. So you've seen Melbourne and Sydney going gangbusters, nearly doubling the last 5 or 6 years, now coming off, whilst the other markets have been fledging. And what you're seeing now is that Sydney's coming off, Melbourne's coming off a little bit, but the other markets are actually boosted. And they're boosted because of numbers, migration, population growth. Because to me, everything, there's only truth in numbers. So I just study, okay, what is the population growth in a particular area? What is the migration? What is the land supply? What can come on the market? Because that will drive prices, and also the affordability. So I see there's opportunities to make money in real estate 10 out of 10 years. but you need to go to different markets.
Yeah, right. Do you see a meltdown coming in the next 3 to 5 years?
No.
You don't?
None whatsoever.
Wow. And the reason, and are you talking property or economic at large?
Economic at large, yeah. I think the world's actually doing fairly well, and this argument between China and America is shaking things up, and Trump's shaking things up. Trump reducing taxes to 20-25% has brought $3 trillion onshore into America at a time where America is putting interest rates up, which is positive because they realise that the economy is doing well. Now we're at a stage in Australia where our unemployment rate's at 5%, our growth rate's up, and we've got the highest migration we've had in Australian history and creating more jobs. Last year we created 400,000 jobs. This year we've created nearly 300,000 already. So I see things, and this isn't in a time where high inflation. I mean, if we were talking in the 70s, we didn't have this migration, but we might have had job creation. However, we would have had inflation at double digits. Now we've still got inflation at barely 3-4%. So I see a lot of positives in the next 4 or 5 years. And I'm a firm believer that Australia should become a big Australia. We should become 40, 50 million by 2040, 2050. And the main reason is that we have 5% of the world's land mass today, and we barely have half of 1% of the total world's population. And I've been at conferences overseas where they're talking about, hey, the world's going to reach $10 billion. And then look at Australia. They've got 5% of the world's land mass, and they've got a small amount of population. I think we need to pull our weight, for our kids and their kids.
Yep.
And by 2100, we should be maybe at 100 million. Now, for us to do that, we need to get smart. And whilst money's cheap, the government should be borrowing $1 trillion and building a national rail loop, fast train right around the country, and building the satellite cities around those particular areas.
Wow, that's visionary.
And we should be doing that stuff. Now, we have got infrastructure, a lot of infrastructure, because we're behind going on now, which is also helping drive that economy. But we should be really biting the bullet to build those satellites and build things further.
Because I think it was in your book, The 7 Steps to Wealth, that you originally talked about how the corridor between Brisbane and the Gold Coast at some point was just going to be the super city. That was you talking about that, wasn't it? Which we're starting to see actually coming to fruition now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how does that feel when you look at that in hindsight? Because I remember when I read that in your book, I was like, wow, that's a big fucking claim.
Yeah.
And now you see it's really bridging.
Well, do you know what? It's even better for me because I've still got property in that corridor.
Yeah, right.
But my first people who read 7 Steps to Wealth said, I want to buy property. Where should I buy? So look, buy in this area here, Pimpama, own that area there. And they bought 1,000 square metres of land for $66,000, $66 a square metre. That land is now worth about $750 a square metre. So there's nothing you can show me that's performed better. And they've got a house on it that's that was renting for $180 a week. That's now renting for $500 a week. And they've turned that little investment that, this guy started with $20,000 to buy his first house for $160 something thousand. And that's turned into over $2 million simply by compound growth and simply by land. So I see that growth area, particularly between Brisbane and Gold Coast. That's high on my list, and I've got a lot of land in that area.
So John's top picks for property right now. So that's one area, the corridor. Where else do you see property being a good pick right now?
I'm buying in Adelaide, north and west of Melbourne, in a particular bracket, mainly around Mernda Station, and where we're in Sydney, we picked areas around the M5, M7. But a buzz area that we went to was Edmondson Park, where we're buying land at $400 a metre. That's now $1,200 a metre, and it's done really, really well. So we look for population growth, infrastructure growth. And proximity to the capital cities. So we look within those areas, and then for areas that haven't necessarily shown the growth. When we got into Sydney in 2011, I couldn't convince my Sydney clients to buy Sydney. They said, "No, John, it's a basket case." The median house price in 2003 was, $520, and in 11 it was $575. So it had hardly gone up. I said, "Guys, that's when we should be buying." So my Melbourne clients, my Brisbane clients, my Perth clients, Adelaide clients all bought Sydney. Sydney clients didn't jump in until 13, 14. And then Sydney ran till, probably 17, mid-17. And all it's done is it's overshot, come down a little bit. But I actually think that Sydney so far this year, I should say, New South Wales created 120,000 jobs already. There's some massive numbers.
So you don't see that correction lasting for long in Sydney?
No, I don't at all. No,
yeah, right.
I think that finances is a challenge.
Well, that's going to be my next question, because finance has really tightened up. Like the banks have, they've copped a little bit of a kicking over the inquiry and how things went down. Lending being as tight as what it is, how do you see that playing out in the market?
The bank. One thing I know about the banks,
they want to make money.
They just want to make money.
Yeah.
So they'll keep their heads down for a bit. And they'll be back, like a raging bull. They'll just be back, lending money. And what they might end up doing is setting up their finance companies again, which is what like Westpac had AGC and ANZ had a Sander, and National Australia Bank had Custom Credit, and then they could go outside of the banking regulations and just do the deals that supposedly APRA are a little bit dodgy about. But on top of that, what we're seeing is so much more money come into the country from America particularly, and also from Europe and a little bit from Japan, through the RMBS, which is the mortgage-backed securities, into the second-tier banks and also the second-tier lenders, and we're seeing a big uptake in that.
So let's say someone's wanting to get started in the property market. They're a little bit scared off because they've told the doom and gloom is coming. They're seeing the headlines in the papers. They want to get started. Sydney has completely priced them out of the market because I think the median here is now, what, $1 million?
About $1 million.
$1 million bucks. What would be your advice to someone if they wanted to get started? Like you'd be saying, okay, first of all, you need to save a deposit. Here's how much I'd save. And then here's what I'd do from there. What would be John's quick tips?
Look, two things. I'd save a deposit of $50,000 to $100,000, and then I'd find a lender that would give me a 95% loan. So that depends on your income.
Yep.
Which is, I'm really going back to what my daughter did when she bought her first property at age 21. She got a 95% loan through, I think, RAMS or one of those groups, and she saved up $20,000, and I put in $20,000 to help her out as well. And that's the other thing. Tap your, if you're young, tap your parents, grandparents, anyone for a helping hand. Get started now. Get it into your system, because the sooner you start, the sooner you'll get into it, then the better you'll be. Two things in property: cash flow and growth. You should be buying property that after tax costs you no money. You shouldn't be putting in your pocket to buy property. So to do that, you actually need to claim depreciation and make sure you're getting enough rent to pay your interest costs and lock in your interest costs. And then growth is buying land in high population growth areas with infrastructure. Do that. Yeah, and when I say high population growth areas, the average population growth in Australia is around about 1.5 to 2%. I'd be looking at areas of minimum 5 and 10+%. Because then you'll attract the Westfield shopping centres, the railway stations, the schools, all those things. And if you can get a 450, 500 square metre block, particularly in certain councils, in probably 15, 20 years, the average size block will be 80 to 120 square metres.
Yeah, right.
So if you've got a 400 or 500 square metre block, it might not have one resident, one tenant, it might have 4 or 5.
Yeah, right.
And that's where land's going to become very special the next 20 years with this massive migration that we've got happening over the next 20 years to replace our baby boomers retiring.
Okay, so let's look at the other end of the market. Someone's running a successful business. They've built up a bit of a war chest. They've got a couple of $1 million in the bank. How would you advise that person to invest in property? Would there be a different strategy, or would you be saying do the same thing?
No, it would be a different strategy because banks view those people differently. So you've got to look at what your resources are. And when I look at resources, I look at my ability to fund, my servicing capacity, my ability to fund, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I have 3 pools of investment. I have my residential housing, which goes really well, my commercial property, and then I have my rural property, which is going to be, obviously future urban in, 10, 20 years' time. And that's the long game. So someone with business with money in the bank that's, in their 40s that wants to play the long game, for something in their 60s, I would say maybe look at future urban property on the outskirts of, one of the main capital cities. in particularly the high growth areas, and do your numbers on demographics, and make sure you do your numbers on the environmental as well, your environmental checks, because that's the one thing that's hurt land over the last 10, 15 years is that, if you had 100 hectares of land, because of environmental constraints now, it may not all be usable, or for some people, with too many trees or water going through it, et cetera, it may only have 20% of it that's useful.
Yeah, right. Fantastic. For those people who haven't read your book, The 7 Steps to Wealth by John Fitzgerald, where can they pick up a copy?
Get it at any bookshop.
Any bookshop?
Yeah. Well, certainly get it at the airport, but yeah, get it anywhere. And,
you don't just have a book. You also provide coaching services as well?
Yeah, I do coaching services. We do workshops. I don't do the workshops much anymore, but I do a lot of online webinars, and I do private functions. So, just for client functions.
Yep.
And that's what I spend most of my time doing, just with the clients who are with me, who are on the path of building a portfolio of properties.
Yeah, right. Fantastic. And so they can find out more about you at where?
7stepstowealth.com.au by all means.
John, this is actually, it's kind of been a little bit surreal, because as we're talking, I remember reading your book, fuck, I'd love to meet this guy one day. And that was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And here we are. But I've got to tell you, mate, you are absolutely razor sharp on everything that you've come up with today. And yeah, it's been a real honor, a real pleasure. Thank you so much for being on Unstoppable.
It's been a fantastic experience for me as well. Thank you, Kerwin, and you're doing a great job.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
Really appreciate it.
There you have it, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Unstoppable with me, your host, Kerwin Ray. And do me a favor, don't forget to drop me a review on iTunes. Would love to hear what you think. I love reading what you guys have to say. And your reviews make sure we keep creating killer content just like this. If you want to stay up to date with me and all my movements, please jump onto the website, kerwinray.com. And also check us out on social media at Kerwin Ray.